Welcome back. How frustrating is that? I mean, I just wrote a book called Ethical Oil, defending the oil industry, but I'm not part of the oil industry. I don't even have shares in an oil company, and someone whose very livelihood is defending oil companies won't even speak a word to Tony Clement about taxes. Well, you know, it's the elephant in the room. It's 50 cents a liter, and she tells me she's not going to raise it in Parliament. I just find that so frustrating. But joining me now on the line from Montreal is my friend Michel Kelly-Gagnon, the boss of the Montreal Economic Institute, a free market think tank. Michel, thank you for joining us on the show today to talk about energy.
Thank you for having me, Ezra.
Now, I mean, we were just talking during the break. I suppose I shouldn't be so upset, because if you're in industry, like Faith Goodman is, and if you criticize the government too stridently, they can slap you around with more regulations or more taxes, right?
Correct, and also, I mean, they're always afraid of public image. If some shareholder or some group would dislike one comment or another, you know, they always fear that as well.
You know, it sounds like we need some sort of independent think tank like the Montreal Economic Institute. Now, you've been in, I mean, obviously, as your name implies, you work in the province of Quebec, a province that these days has been fairly critical of the oil sands. Now, you have a new study that you just released yesterday that has a refreshing pro-Alberta, pro-energy tilt to it. Why don't you tell our viewers who are across English Canada what you have found in La Belle Provence?
Sure, well, it's a study that really looks at a bunch of facts, but I would like to start my first presence on your show by quoting Comrade Gilles Duceppe. I think it's especially appropriate.
Go ahead.
And so Gilles Duceppe was quoted in La Presse newspaper on February 12th, 2011, saying, and I quote, "Alberta's oil enriches Canada, but it impoverishes Quebec." Huh. And I think that part of the quote is based on the notion of the so-called Dutch disease, which refers, as you may know, in the Netherlands in the 1970s, they started to do some mining for natural gas. And this boom in natural resources in the Netherlands had their currency go up. And as their currency go up, they started having all sorts of problems with their manufacturing sector, because it was becoming more difficult to sell their products, to customers outside of the Netherlands.
So
right?
what are your findings with regards to the influence of petroleum prices on the economy in Quebec?
Well, that's exactly that. So we looked at that, and what we found is that if you take a perspective from 1992 to 2009, so close to 27 years of data, what you find is that the decline of employment in the manufacturing sector followed the same pace in the countries that had oil versus the countries that did not have oil. And so basically, that while it is true that the oil prices can have an impact on the Canadian dollar, and therefore can have an impact short-term in terms of the manufacturing job, that's not the main trend. The main trend is about automatization, which basically means that we can now, because of technology, produce more stuff using less employees.
Well, and that's the thing. The oil sands is a very high-tech industry. It's not like conventional oil or oil in Saudi Arabia or Libya, where they just sort of poke a straw in the ground. I mean, the oil sands uses a lot of technology, but it does use a lot of people power, too. Now, you've done some studies in Quebec about Quebec perceptions and Quebec views about the oil sands in particular. So putting aside your point that you just made about the impact on the dollar in Quebec manufacturing, tell me some of the things you found out about how Quebecers feel about Alberta and the oil sands and things like that. And maybe tell us a little bit about gas that has been found, shale gas that's been found in Quebec.
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, the results were very refreshing in terms of the poll. Basically, 68% of Quebecers wanted the development of the oil sands to go ahead, providing that there'd be continuous improvement on the environmental side, but they were not by any means in favor of stopping the development. And a strong majority of Quebecers also had a positive image of Alberta. And also what we found is that in terms of migration, there's a lot of Quebecers coming to Alberta, but interesting also there's some migration coming from Alberta to Quebec. And so there are strong ties, and that Albertan expertise is and will become more and more relevant as we develop both shale gas, but also, you know, the oil, old airy, oil patch in the St. Lawrence Seaway. And while there have been, you know, bumps and stops and debates, I think that it will go ahead, reason will prevail, and Alberta and Quebec will be, both on the practical and political level, some good allies. There are some good reasons for that.
You know, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because sometimes in the West, people think, oh, Quebec is on the opposite side of us. But I think quite often, Quebec and Alberta have a common purpose, and that is stopping Ottawa from opposing provincial ventures. And are you hopeful that maybe that Alberta-Quebec ties can strengthen as we both sort of triangulate against a busybody government in Ottawa?
Very much so, and the fact is that, you know, this is a call, our paper is also a call for action, which basically takes could take three angles. First of all, we could conceive of, you know, a Quebec Day in Alberta and an Alberta Day in Quebec, where, you know, the politician from each province, say every odd year, could visit the legislature of the other province, make a speech, have events, do that kind of stuff together. Also, businesses have activities, but they can have their link better known. They can advertise more these links so that people can be aware of that. I don't remember the exact number, but there's a Quebecer in charge of one of the main plant at CNRL, and he was telling me that there's a huge number of Quebecers that are working just on this one plant. I forget the exact number, but it was quite impressive. And then finally, you know, there's the work of think tank and groups like ours who can, you know, engage that kind of dialogue, as I've been doing in the last 2 days.
You know, I'm so pleased to hear, and your poll results that show more than 2/3 of Quebecers want the oil sands to proceed is so encouraging, and that's the kind of thing we need to hear in English Canada, to know that we have allies in Quebec. Last question, and we only have a few seconds, Michel. I was talking earlier with Faith Goodman, who refused to take on the federal government and the provincial governments about the taxes at the gas pump. Montreal, in particular, has a city tax, as well as a provincial tax and a federal tax on gas. What do you think the government should do in terms of high gas prices? Do you think the government should lower its taxes, remove it from the GST? What do you think we should do to give consumers a break?
Well, at the very least, Stephen Harper should follow his own advice. And back when he was in the opposition, he said that when the price of gas goes up, at least the federal tax should not increase. So, and there could be mechanism for that. And the other thing, too, is to allow for more refineries to be built. Because one of the problems is a problem of capacity. But there are so much regulatory hurdle that you basically cannot have a new refinery put in place. So if the government is serious about wanting to address the issue of tax prices, they can work on taxes, they can work on refineries, and that will be real work rather than just cheap populism.
Michel Kelly-Gagnon, time goes too quickly. Thank you very much. I know we'll have you on as a regular. You're a great voice of reason from the province of Quebec, and it's so refreshing to hear your views. Thank you. And hey, viewers, don't you go away. After